and I'm a member of the convening team of the tribunal, which consists of the following, and I would want them to rise as I call their names so that you may know them. Louisa Hanoun, Deputy National Assembly of Algeria, President of the Workers' Party of Algeria. Charles Barron, Human Rights Leader, City Councilman, New York City. Edinice Santana de Jesus, Executive Director, CUT Union, Bahia, Brazil. And as was said yesterday, Cynthia N. McKinney is also a member of this convening team. I will also want to introduce the judges of this tribunal, the majority of which are sitting in front of you. The judges are the following. They will also stand up as I call their names. I hope I'll call their names correctly. Ajua Ayetoro, Milton Barbosa, Director of International Relations, Unified Black Movement in Brazil. Jose Candido, State Deputy from Sao Paulo in Brazil. Ward Churchill, Native American activist. Alex Deluge, Chair Caribbean Commission, Workers' Party of France. Jill Elijah, Deputy Director of the Criminal Justice Institute at Harvard Law School. Charles Eloy, Robert Fabet, convener Caribbean Workers and People's Alliance, Guadeloupe. Jesus Chucho Garcia, a professor of anthropology, founder and director of the Afro-Venezuelan Network, Caracas, Venezuela. Daniel Glaxton is not here, but he was supposed to be part of the judges. Charlie Lendo, Executive Board, General Union of Guadeloupean Workers. Guadeloupe Gamboa Ortiz, I know that he had problems with traveling. Jacqueline Petito, Alliance of Workers affiliated to the International Liaison Committee, Martinique. Christophe Rangoli, spokesperson, Martinican Committee in support of Katrina Tribunal, whose honorary president is a renowned human rights fighter, Mrs. Luis Vasquez, Trade Union, Independent Democratic Workers' Party, Mexico. Julia Wright, human rights activist. Richard Wright, Continual Coordinator, Friends and Family of Mumia Abu Jamal, Paris, France. This constitutes the work I'm supposed to do this morning. I want to welcome you all who came from far and near, who came from across the continents, who came to seek justice for the victims of Rita and Katrina, who came to stop the world from sinking into barbarism and to create an order that might assist and make humanity and life worth living. Thank you very much.
We'll proceed in a couple of minutes. We have a technical issue to address. Would like to say good morning to this distinguished judicial body, and good morning to the public who is here to witness this International Human Rights Tribunal on Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. I am Kwame Osachifo Kalimara. I am the co-coordinator of the prosecution team representing NCBL, the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, New African Peoples Organization. I'm going to share with you the names and representations of the prosecution team. And those of us who are present should stand. My co-coordinator is Joan Gibbs for the Center for Law and Social Change at Medgar Evers, and also a representative of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. Kathy Albisa of the National Economic and Social Rights Initiative. Chandra Bhatnagar, staff attorney, ACLU Human Rights Program. Lisa Crooms, U.S. Human Rights Network, Howard University School of Law, the National Economic and Social Rights Institute. King Downing, ACLU, National Campaign Against Police Brutality and Racial Profiling. Mark Fancier, National Conference of Black Lawyers, International Affairs, ACLU of Michigan. Camus Carl Franklin, Center for Constitutional Rights, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, co-chair, National Conference of Black Lawyers Executive Committee, and also a member of the National Lawyers Guild. Damon Hewitt, NAACP, Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Jeribu Hill, Mississippi Workers Center for Human Rights, Southern Human Rights Organizers Conference, Black Women's International Roundtable, Cuny Law School Mississippi Project, Fannie Lou Hamer Sisters Roundtable. Obadari Jupiter, Washington, D.C., Legal Defender. Chokwe Lumumba People's Hurricane Relief Fund, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, Mississippi Disaster Relief Coalition, also New African People's Organization. Carrie McLean, National Lawyers Guild, International Association of Democratic Lawyers. Afia Wagaza, African American Institute for Policy Studies and Planning, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. Bill Quigley, National Lawyers Guild, Loyola University. Nkechi Taifa, Legacy Empowerment Center and the National Bar Association, National Bar Association. Tracy L. Washington, Louisiana Justice Institute. And we do have other workers who have been very able and assisting us in the prosecution team. Your Honors, it's also important for us to acknowledge that we have Ms. Carmelita Pope Freeman, who is the Regional Director, Southwest Regional Office of the U.S. Department of Justice, Community Relations Service, who is also here. Your Honors, I think it would be important at this time to address the issue of notification. You have in your packets letters addressed to President George W. Bush, Governor of Louisiana Kathleen Blanco. You have a letter to Governor Haley Barbour of the state of Mississippi, and a letter to Mayor of New Orleans, Ray Nagin. On July the 16th of this year, they received notification of this international tribunal and were requested to appear in this auditorium at 9 a.m. And at this time, we have no response from the government of the United States, FEMA, or the Attorney Generals, because the Attorney Generals of the U.S. government was also sent notification, as well as the Attorney Generals for both the states of Louisiana and Mississippi. Because of the fact that they have not appeared, what we have done is amass some documents that we will present to you that best represents their response to Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. The first document that I wish to introduce on their behalf in their absence is the federal response to Hurricane Katrina, Lessons Learned. It's dated February the 26th. The second government document is entitled, and this is from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Performance Evaluation of the New Orleans and Southeastern Louisiana Hurricane Protection System, Final Draft Report of the Interagency Performance Evaluation, Volume 1, Executive Summary and Overview, and it's dated June the 1st of 2006. It's the second exhibit. Our third exhibit is entitled Failure of an Initiative, and it's the final report of the Select Bipartisan Committee to investigate the preparation for and response to Hurricane Katrina. Our fourth document is entitled Broken Promises, the Republican Response to Katrina, August the 23rd of 2006. And this was produced by the Senate and House Democrats. Our fifth document is entitled Hurricane Katrina Document Analysis, the Emails of Michael Brown. And this was given to us by Representative Charles Milankan, U.S. House of Representatives, and is dated November the 2nd of 2005. The next document is actually from the state of Louisiana, from the Office of the Governor. It's entitled Response to U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Document and Information Request dated October the 7th, 2005, and to the U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee to investigate the preparation and response to Hurricane Katrina, submitted December the 2nd, 2005. This is an overview of Governor Kathleen Blanco's actions in preparation for and response to Hurricane Katrina. So this is the first exhibit for, and the only exhibit for, the state of Louisiana. This next document is dated September the 1st, 2005. Governor Haley Barbour urged to blame Bush, and this is from the newsmax.com staff. This will be Mississippi document number 1. Mississippi document number 2 is entitled Human Events Outline, dated October the 7th, 2005. It says, Ms. Governor Barbour, Louisiana aid package seems very excessive. And so this is our final document. These documents that I have introduced to you represent the best responses to Hurricane Katrina and Rita that we could obtain on our own in their absence. At this time, I would like to read the charges. Number 1, gross violation of human right to be free from racial discrimination, including discrimination based on perceived immigration status. Charge number 2, violation of human right to return, resettlement, and reintegration of internally displaced persons. Violation number 3, violation of human right to life, dignity, and recognition as a person. Number 4, violation of the human right to be free from torture and other cruel and inhumane and degrading treatment or punishment. 5, violation of the human rights to freedom of association and assembly, freedom of movement. 6, violation of the human right to work, right to adequate health care, right to adequate housing. 7, violation of the human right to an adequate standard of living, freedom from poverty, right to education. 8, violation of the human right to vote, electoral rights, and to participate in governance. 9, violation of the human right to fair trial, right to liberty, security of person, right to equal protection of the law. 10, violation of human rights related to privacy, family life, and missing relatives. What I have to present to you at this point are the charges and the relevant international law that complies with all of those charges. And this concludes my introductory remarks.
May it please the court, members of this esteemed tribunal of international and U.S.-based jurists, and the stellar team of human and civil rights prosecutors who comprise my co-counsel. My name is Nkechi Taifa, and I provide this opening statement on behalf of the survivors who are the victims of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. This is a case about rights and violation of rights, about obligations and breaches of obligation, about accountability and lack of accountability, and about trust and betrayal of trust. The purpose behind this tribunal, however, can be summed up in the following short folk tale about the monkey and the lion, and permit me to share it with you. There lived a monkey and a lion who did not like each other, and at the edge of this forest lived an old man and his son. Now, each and every day, that little chattering monkey came screeching through the treetops to the edge of the forest where the old man and his son lived. And each and every day, that little monkey bragged about how bad he had beat up that mighty, ferocious lion in the forest. Well, one day after the monkey had chattered his usual boast, the boy went to his father and said, "Father, I don't understand. If the lion is supposed to be such a mighty and ferocious animal, then how does that little chattering monkey beat him up all of the time? When will the lion have a victory?" "Son," the wise father answered, "the lion will have a victory when he has a chance to tell his side of the story." And that is what this tribunal is all about. Allowing the lion to speak, to roar, to tell her side of the story, rather than having the story of governmental abuse and neglect of Katrina victims come filtered through the screechings of the monkey. During this tribunal, you will hear from survivors, eyewitnesses, who will chronicle for you, in their own words, their suffering and anguish, similar to the words spoken by survivors 2 years ago during the International Commission of Inquiry, where quotes such as the following were elicited: "We were treated as if we were criminals, when all we wanted was to survive. They pointed their guns at us. I didn't look at the National Guard because I know they killed a guy just for looking at them straight in their eyes. We had to get into the trucks. We didn't know where they were taking us, but we were all separated from our loved ones." Katrina was a man-made disaster orchestrated by the government. It didn't seem possible that the government would do this to its own people. They were shooting as we ran across the bridge trying to get to dry land, screaming, "You niggers and monkeys are not going to get across that bridge." But we ran anyway because we knew if we had to turn around and go back to those rising waters, we would die. We didn't get no help from nobody. The real truth is they don't want us back. They've wanted to get rid of us for a long time, and Katrina gave them the perfect opportunity. They separated families. It was like the slave ship all over again. They carried out a campaign of terror and genocide. But perhaps what summed up everything the most poignantly was the oft-repeated phrase, "They left us here to die." They left us here to die. Hurricanes Katrina and Rita focus an undeniable spotlight for millions in the United States and across the globe, portraying the deep poverty and inequality that is the continuing legacy of racism. You will hear evidence this week. This week, 2 years ago, the world witnessed the monumental failure of the U.S. government to protect and respect the lives of people, the majority of whom were African American and poor. Hurricane Katrina, indeed, was a national disaster, a natural disaster of proportions thereto before not experienced in the United States. But You will hear testimony that Hurricane Katrina was also a man-made disaster involving massive international human rights law violations perpetrated against the people of New Orleans and the Gulf region. And tragically, the evidence suggests that much of the devastation associated with Katrina could have been avoided. The United States government maintains the international legal obligation to ensure that people within its territory and subject to its jurisdiction are afforded all the internationally recognized human rights. And the United States government has obligations not to violate international human rights law and not to permit other entities and individuals to engage in such breaches. State and local governments are obligated to ensure human rights protections as well, while multinational corporations, local companies, and private individuals as non-state actors share this responsibility as well. Pursuant to the Vienna Declaration, all human rights are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. Thus, civil and political rights are not enjoined in a vacuum and cannot be effectively afforded to people if their economic, social, cultural, and other rights are not provided for. You will hear charges levied by hurricane survivors against the federal, state, and local governments for serious, systematic, and ongoing violations of their human rights, drawing upon relevant human rights law found in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the American Convention on Human Rights, the United Nations Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention Against Discrimination in Education, the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment and punishment, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. You will hear about the forcible removal of tens of thousands of New Orleans and Gulf Coast residents, the disenfranchisement of tens and thousands of African American voters, the refusal of the government to adhere to its own policies and procedures pertaining to the security and well-being of internally displaced persons, the gross mismanagement of resources for the reconstruction of the region, the elimination of environmental and worker protection laws, the criminalization of thousands of survivors, particularly the displaced, and the establishment of a reconstruction process that excludes effective input, oversight, and control over the process by the majority of the African American population. You will hear testimony on past and ongoing discrimination in New Orleans based on race, gender, and identity, which are violative of the human right to be free from discrimination and to enjoy equal protection under the law. You will hear testimony on irregularities in New Orleans voting post-Katrina, inadequate facilities for internally displaced persons to vote, disproportionate disenfranchisement, newly shifted demographics caused by displacement resulting in a shifting political landscape, all violative of the international human right to vote and right to participate in government. You will hear testimony of the suspension of grand juries in New Orleans, suspension of jury trials in criminal cases, breach of the right to a speedy trial, misidentification of arrestees, abandonment of jailed persons as the waters rose, inhuman treatment in detention facilities violative of the international human right to a fair trial, right to liberty and security of the person, right to be free from torture and cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment or punishment. There will be testimony on the unnecessary loss of life and human dignity, implementation of shoot-on-site orders by police, and inadequate food, housing, and health care, which are violative of the international human rights of the right to life, human dignity, and recognition as a person. You will hear about the misidentification of human remains, undue delay in the reunification of missing family members, failure to provide same-sex couples who were Katrina victims the same privacy, family, and missing relative rights as other families similarly affected by Katrina. It's a violation of the international human rights related to privacy, family life, and missing relatives. You will hear about the federal government not providing adequate humanitarian and other assistance, state and local governments also failing in these respects, private companies and individuals wrongfully exploiting the catastrophe, and inappropriate policies contributing to death and illness by the rejection and delay of humanitarian assistance from offering countries, violative of international human rights relating to receiving humanitarian assistance. Jailed persons abandoned to Katrina in waist-deep water for days without proper sanitation and food, beatings and other physical mishandling of persons in custody, violations of the international human right to be free from torture, cruel and unusual treatment and punishment. Delay in permitting persons to return to New Orleans. Inadequate facilities in New Orleans to support all who wish to return. Failure to have in place adequate plans to help prevent another Katrina catastrophe. And failure to open up the rebuilding process without regard to race or economic status. This evidence, violative of the international right to return, resettlement, and reintegration of displaced human persons. The inability of internally displaced persons to associate and assemble caused by the displacement, violative of the international human right to freedom of association and assembly and the right to be free from displacement. And finally, other international human rights reflecting the interrelatedness of civil and political rights on the one hand, and economic, social, and cultural rights include the right to work, the right to adequate health care, the right to adequate housing, the right to an adequate standard of living, right in education and property rights. We are here to shed light on difficult questions, and you will hear testimony that will help you with answers. Where was the evacuation plan for the hospitals, for the prisons, jails, and other vulnerable populations? Why did we see images of dogs being flown first class in chartered planes and buses, while blacks were packed like human cargo reminiscent to slave ships? Where was the due process for new arrestees who were held incognito in makeshift prison at Greyhound bus station? Why were those who tried to obtain basic human needs, such as food or water from nearby stores, often identified as looters if they were black, but as victims or survivors if they were not? Is there a systematic program of ethnic cleansing taking place in New Orleans and the Mississippi Gulf Coast? Is the black majority being denied the right to return to their homes? What role does the historic legacy of institutional racism and national oppression within U.S. society play if a similar disaster were to have happened today in another part of the country, with primarily impacted the rich and the privileged? Would the response have been the same as what we saw with Katrina? Do the residents of the U.S. hurricane-stricken Gulf Coast deserve the same human rights protections as those living in tsunami-ravaged Indonesia? Is restitution, reparation due for the grievous injuries sustained by Katrina victims as a result of U.S. lawlessness? I repeat, is restitution, reparation due? Few questions challenge us to consider nearly 400 years of history all at once, to tunnel inside our souls and determine and discover what we truly believe about race and equality and the value of human suffering. But perhaps the most critical query, can the United States government abide by the moral and ethical mandates that a human rights framework presents, or are we once again relegated to Dred Scott justice, where the human rights of blacks are not bound to be respected? Esteemed jurist, you have before you an awesome responsibility. just as Mamie Till Mobley demanded an open casket for the world to see the 1954 image of her 14-year-old son, Emmett, who was savagely mutilated and dumped in Mississippi's Tallahatchie River exactly 50 years ago, this tribunal will likewise present an open casket for the world to see and hear the testimonies of Katrina's human rights abuses. Open it up, Mamie Till Mobley screamed. Let the people see what they did to my boy. She demanded as her son's mangled and battered body was placed on public view, forcing the nation and the world to face in shocked disbelief its horror of racism. Open it up, she demanded. This tribunal will likewise open up the voluminous body of evidence which occurred here 2 years ago for the world to see and hold those responsible accountable. In conclusion, Dr. Martin Luther King once stated that the ultimate test of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and moments of convenience, but where he stands in moments of challenge and moments of controversy. Yes, it may be challenging to some that we are using an international human rights frame through which to present these abuses. It may be controversial for some to hear mere whispers that crimes against humanity were perpetrated domestically or that provisions of genocide could be applicable. But these are not comfortable or convenient times. Son, the wise father answered, the lion will have a victory when he has a chance to tell his side of the story. And he will do so through the language and lens that the world community has embraced and understands: international human rights. Just as maybe Till Mobley did in 1954, there is a time when we too must open up the casket. There is a time when we must right the wrong. Moments of national crisis also represent moments of opportunity. Let us rise to this auspicious occasion of opportunity. It is a game time for the world to see. That time is now. On behalf of the survivors who are the victims of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, I urge that you listen carefully to all of the evidence presented at this tribunal and return a verdict rooted in international human rights law, a verdict for justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Nkechi Taifa. Now we're going to hear from Chandra Bhatnagar, who's going to address the issue of prisoners' rights.
Good morning, Your Honors, sisters and brothers, friends and comrades. My name is Chandra Bhatnagar. I'm a staff attorney with the Human Rights Program of the American Civil Liberties Union, and I will be serving as one of the prosecutors today in the tribunal and focusing my presentation on the rights of prisoners and specifically on prison conditions. In the next hour, you will hear testimony and will receive evidence related to the very serious human rights abuses endured by women and men incarcerated in Orleans Parish Prison and in other facilities before, during, and after Hurricane Katrina. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a significant event that took place yesterday. There was a death in Orleans Parish Prison. This death was significant because of the loss of life, but also because of the fact that it was the 5th death in the year 2007 that took place in Orleans Parish Prison, which I'll be referring to as OPP. So if we could take a moment of silence to recognize the life that was lost yesterday, it would be appreciated. Your Honors, as you consider the evidence that is placed before you this morning, I ask that you remain aware that several human rights instruments bear directly upon the violations of prisoners' rights and human rights that occurred at both Orleans Parish Prison and at several transfer locations during Hurricane Katrina. Several of these instruments are binding upon the United States government at the federal, state, and local level. The Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, and Degrading Treatment or Punishment, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination are all binding treaties signed and ratified by the U.S. government that the federal government is obligated to implement and to adhere to at the federal, at the state, and at the local level. Your Honors, I ask that as you consider the evidence presented to you and listen to the testimony today, that you recall a central tenet of human rights law that is absent from U.S. constitutional law but is articulated in the ICCPR Article 10, Section 1, and I quote, "All persons deprived of their liberty shall be treated with humanity and with respect for the inherent dignity of the human person," end quote. There's one important consideration that I would like to address off the bat at the beginning regarding the context of the human rights violations that you will be hearing about. We will concede that the context of some of these violations is in the midst of an emergency. However, the treaty provisions that I will be discussing are non-derogable, meaning they can never be abridged, not during an earthquake, not during a flood, not during a hurricane, or any other natural or man-made disaster. Even if one were to assume that the storm presented exigent circumstances that limited requirements for treaty compliance, many of the serious human rights violations that you will hear about pre- and post-date the storm, or are related to violations that took place when there was, in fact, no imminent danger. In addition to the binding treaties that I cited earlier, I would also like to draw your attention to some of the non-binding advisory instruments widely followed by UN member countries which should be adhered to by the United States. They are, among the most relevant are, the Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, the Basic Principles for the Treatment of Prisoners, and the Body of Principles for the Protection of All Persons under any form of detention or imprisonment. Before we begin, I'd like to mention a few issues that we will not be able to cover in this presentation, but will be covered throughout the day in other sectors. Firstly, there have been numerous reports of juvenile prisoners being mistreated and abused and being populated with adults before, during, and after the storm. That issue will be discussed in a subsequent presentation. In addition, the issue of mass incarceration, prisons, disproportionate minority confinement, racial profiling, and police brutality and abuse, all of those issues will also be addressed in subsequent presentations as well. Your Honors, before I call my first witness, I would like to introduce some items into evidence. The first item is a human rights report entitled Abandoned and Abused, and I would like to offer it into evidence for your consideration and have it marked Prosecution Exhibit Number 1, Prisoners' Rights Sector. The second piece of evidence is also a human rights report documenting the violations that have taken place in the prison context and in other contexts since Hurricane Katrina. It is entitled Broken Promises. I also ask that it be entered into evidence and marked as Prosecution Exhibit Number 2, Prisoners' Rights Sector. The last piece of evidence is a declaration attesting to the veracity of a statement made by a man named Mr. Vincent Norman. Mr. Norman is a formerly incarcerated person who is unable to offer testimony today and who experienced several human rights violations at OPP and at other correctional facilities before, during, and after Hurricane Katrina. I would ask that his statement be entered into evidence and marked as Prosecution Exhibit Number 3, Prisoners' Rights Sector. Mr. Norman has an occupation which requires that he be at sea, and we've tried to reach him several times in the past few weeks and been unable to confirm his attendance here today. We actually got a call from him this morning that he had taken off from work to celebrate his birthday, but to the best of our knowledge, he hasn't arrived. So we have a sworn statement from a licensed attorney in the state of Louisiana who's affirming the veracity of Mr. Norman's statement to her, which I would actually like to read into the record, Your Honor.
Please do so.
This is Mr. Norman's statement. On August 24, 2005, I was stopped by the police and arrested on a warrant for failure to appear in court and a $100 fine. I was supposed to be released at an August 31st hearing after serving a total of 7 days and paying my fine. On the Friday afternoon before the hurricane, Orleans Parish Prison stopped releasing people from the jail. I got my last full meal on Saturday morning, and phones were cut off that evening. On Saturday night, deputies put us all in two-man cells. I was in Templeman 3, Unit B2, and there was a total of 8 men in my cell. When I asked the guard when they would come back, the guard maced my cell. They had no regard for anyone. They were just concerned with themselves. If you asked a question, just a basic question like, when do I get my meds? When do we get to eat? they would mace the cells. By Monday, there were at least 8 feet of water on the bottom tier, but I was in the cell in the upper tier. Some of the inmates were able to open their cells, but my cell door did not open. I witnessed several inmates with various medical conditions suffer from dehydration. We were forced to live off of toilet water and lie in our own waste and bodily fluids. We were drinking out of toilets because that is all we had. The worst part was not knowing if someone would come find us, not knowing if you would see your family, not knowing if you would see your friends. It was just not knowing. When the rescuers arrived, I was still locked in my cell, and they had to pry the bars open. I walked out in chest-deep sewer water and was led to a boat that took me to an overpass. From the overpass, I was taken to Hunt's Correctional, where I spent 48 hours on the rec yard in hell. It was like a POW camp. They had triple murderers mixed in with guys that had never been in prison before. Traffic violations, public drunkenness. I witnessed several stabbings and beatings that were neglected by prison personnel. On one occasion, after being attacked by inmates, an inmate ran for help and was shot by guards. We were forced to bathe in a water hose, and there were no bathrooms to use. I'm ashamed to write this, but I hadn't had proper hygiene since Saturday morning, so you can't imagine the ungodly stench. I would not wish this on my worst enemy. When it was all over, I felt my life had been put in danger for a second time. After leaving Hunt's, we were brought to Ouachita Correctional Center, where the horrendous treatment continued. Ouachita was a reminder of the Old South. I was exposed to overt racism, called racial slurs, and subjected to physical and mental anguish. I saw segregation and outright inhumane events. We started out getting some hygiene products, but it went downhill, and then there was no hygiene at all. They treated us like second-class citizens. The guards cast judgments on us, treating us like we were all the same. They wouldn't talk to the inmates, and if we asked questions, we would be maced or beanbagged. One of the lieutenants once said, "I could treat you like men, or I could treat you like what you are." When I asked, "And what's that?" he just rolled his eyes at us. Ouachita needs investigation. I've never experienced blatant racism, never seen it like that. After going through what I've been through, I wonder if I'll ever be the same. They used to set the food trays on the floor, and we would have to pick them up from there. I asked, why did they do that? And they said we were like monkeys, and that's what you do with animals at the zoo. In early November, my sister started helping me get a court date. I found out on December 2nd that I had been released, and I was transferred to Hunt for processing and released on December 5th in New Orleans. They had lost my clothing, so until I reached New Orleans, I just had scrubs and sandals. It was very, very cold. I was in jail for almost 4 months on a $100 fine that I didn't even know I had to pay.